Now that we've talked about the angle relationships, we're going to see how they are related in terms of measure. So today we're going to be just going back and looking at those angle relationships and then finding out some things about how they're related. So we have, if two lines are parallel and they are cut by a transversal, then each pair of corresponding angles is congruent. So you can see that a corresponding angle makes like an L. So it would be like this L. Those are corresponding angles. Here, in this case, they kind of look like a J. We're going to be going through and looking at those examples I did the other day as well. So again, we're looking at corresponding angles. So we have these two. In this case, there's going to be 4 pairs. So these two would be a corresponding angle. Here, those would be corresponding, and those. One thing to note is that the corresponding angles have the same measure, but also when you look at the other pair, like this pair and that pair, together they make a linear pair. Alternate interior, that's our first pair, second pair. And again, these guys have that relationship where together they are the same, but if you took the other pair, they would make 180. Here's my alternate exterior, my other pair, same side interior, those again make 180. And I have another one on the other side. And lastly, we have our same side exterior. Okay, so you can play around with that, just kind of get an idea of how they're related. You can look at their measures here. You can maybe manipulate this a little bit so you can see that even if you change them, we'll still have some measures that are similar. So we'll go through and do the rest of the notes here. So our first few examples are just about corresponding. So once we know a piece of information about parallel lines and their transversals, we can figure out the rest of them. So if this here is 51, that means the corresponding with that would also be 51. And what that means is I can find pretty much all the rest of my angles. So if I tell you that measure of angle 11 is 51, then find the measure of angle 15. It would also be 51 degrees by corresponding angles. All right, so the next one we're going to look at is 11 is 51. Find 16. So just erase this. So we have angle 11 is 51 again, and they want us to figure out what 16 is. And these guys are on the outside, and they're on opposite sides of the transversal. So we would have, so 16 and 11, those would be alternate exterior. Okay, here we have another one. I'd like you to press pause, see if you can figure this one out, and then I'll go over it. All right, one thing I should have pointed out as well on the last slide is since we know that the orange part right here was 42, this part, by definition that we learned earlier in the year, this other side, that blue side, these are not corresponding, but vertical angles to each other. See, they make this V. So the V is actually going to help us to remember vertical angles, and vertical angles are congruent. We're going to find that out here. All right, so the next one is alternate interior angles. So it says in this example that alternate interior are going to be congruent. So you have 1 and 3 being congruent to each other, and 2 and 4 being congruent to each other. So again, we're going to be using a lot of these theorems. So we have that 1 and 2 together. If I add these two, I'm going to get 180. If I take a 3, I'll use a different color, 3, and I add it to 4, that will also give me 180. So alternate exterior are congruent. Congruent means they have the same measure. So this measure 8 and this measure 6, they are the same. And the 5 and the 7 are also congruent to each other. So we have a little bit of examples here. It says the floor diagram shows the floor tiles in Michelle's house. If the measure of angle 2 is 125, find the measure of angle 3. Okay, well, I'm going to notice here that they're telling us that these lines right here are parallel, and we want to know what is the relationship between the angle here of 2 and the angle here of 3. Well, I also know that these other angles, or lines, sorry, are also parallel. So if I treat the blue lines as my parallel lines and the yellow line as my transversal, this will be the transversal, abbreviate that. So if that's the transversal, then how do they compare to this transversal? Well, they're on opposite sides. And how do they compare to these two lines? Well, they'd be on the inside. So here you would have that they are, it would also have a measure of 3 equals 125 by alternate interior angles. Okay, so the next one, go ahead and just try that one. It's be the last one of this lesson, and then tomorrow we're going to be talking about the algebra with this lesson. All right, I want you to notice that the parallel lines here happen to be the blue, light blue highlighted, and the transversal is that pinkish color. So we want to know what's the relationship between 2 and 4. Well, once you establish that your parallel lines are here and your transversal, first you need to decide how are they related in terms of the transversal there. So it turns out that we could see that they actually could form a linear pair if we were to take this angle and shift it down here. So that's by taking that angle and shifting it down, it's making these two a linear pair. So since angle 2 is congruent to angle, it doesn't have a number in it. So since it's congruent to that angle, then that measure, if it was 125 plus the other one, has to equal 180. So when you do that subtract, you're going to figure out that it ends up being 55 degrees.